All right. Hey, well, good morning. Which way is this go? There. I'm trying to get the fireside. And there's also, I guess, a reflection of my computer. So let's go this way. Hey, there's the fire. And there's me. I am late this morning and apologize about that. The reason is that I was on a webinar. I see that Judy Harris is watching. Hello. Hello, Judy Harris. Interesting. So the reason for that is that I was on a webinar this morning with like 1,000 other pastors, faith leaders. I would imagine there were some rabbis and some, imams and some elders of the Mormon Church or whoever. But anyway, I was on a webinar this morning with officials from the state government down Salem, just kind of hearing where things are at with reopening. There's quite honestly still some confusion, and we're still working through that. In fact, my phone is going to be, I'm getting texts from other local pastors and some pastors in other parts of our state, just, trying to figure out what was actually said in that meeting. I do want to say this, when it comes to social media and what we post, I just have a few thoughts that I think are something interesting to consider. There are people who will share things about coronavirus or the safer at home or any of the things that are going on, and have never shared about their faith. And I think something to consider is how I present myself on social media, does it help or does it hurt the work that God has given me to do in terms of telling anyone and everyone about the good news of Jesus Christ, the life change that comes with following Jesus. And I think that's something to consider, that I have all kinds of opinions about politics, and I've been pastoring here for almost 3 years. We're going into our third year. And I've been real clear that I have no interest in getting involved in politics, but it doesn't mean I don't have political opinions. The reason I stay out of those things is because they they distract from my calling to equip Christians for the work of your ministry. And in part of that equipping, I think it's worth thinking about the ministry, the service that God has called you to, is how we present ourselves online and social media. Is that helping, or is it taking away from the work that God's given us to do? Just a thought. This morning, the main thing I was going to talk about, what I love about this Fireside Chat is that when you teach the Bible, you're not going to talk about everything that's in a particular chapter or set of verses or whatever. And we didn't talk about something kind of major in the passage from Sunday morning. And so I wanted to read from Mark chapter 7. In verse 24, it says that Jesus went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek born of Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. And then there's this whole conversation that Jesus has with her about faith and about his ministry. And then as she professes great faith and humility, in verse 29, Jesus says, "For such a reply you may go, the demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. That's a troubling verse. It's a very troubling verse. I have kids. Can my kids be demon possessed? Can your kids be demon possessed? Can your grandkids be demon possessed? Can the neighborhood kid that you think is like a terror and you're like, oh, that kid, he must be demon possessed? It's a troubling, troubling verse. Hey, Brandon. By the way, I see Brandon's on the chat, and they just had a baby. So congratulations to Brandon. I don't know if they're still at the hospital or not, but baby Eleanor looks beautiful. And I don't believe that she is demon possessed. So there you go. Here's what I know. When there are things that are less than clear, I want to focus on the things that are very clear. That's true in life in general. You can look around and you can say, what's going on? And I don't understand this, but what do I understand? What do I know to be true? And then there are things, and there are parts of the Bible, all of the Bible is equally true, but not all of the Bible is equally clear or equally understood. There are times in the Bible where I believe that ancient people attributed something to maybe even demonic possession, and it was a natural, physiological thing. We know there was the story of the little girl who they came to Jesus and said that she's sick, and then on the way to her house, servants came and told the man, your daughter's actually died. Don't bother bringing Jesus. And Jesus went anyway, and he gets there and he says, the girl's not dead, she's only asleep. And everybody laughs, but then he goes up and he revives her. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that they had assumed that she had died and that she was in some sort of coma. I mean, certainly she was in a serious condition. Certainly she might have been dying. But Jesus there says, you think this is what's going on, but it's not. So it is very, very possible, and I would even say likely, that there are stories in the Gospels and in the book of Acts where somebody has something that people refer to as a demonic affliction that could have been something to do either with a physiological issue. Somebody had schizophrenia, somebody had some sort of bipolar, some kind of really extreme mental issue. And, or something to do with drugs. And there was drug use back then. In fact, the word we use for sorcery, pharmakia, occult and witchcraft and sorcery back in those ancient times was almost always linked with some sort of hallucinogenic or with drug use of some kind, substance abuse of some kind. So there's very likely things in the scripture that ancient people ascribed to something spiritual, and it was something natural. Excuse me. That's the thing about going live. Anyway, in this case, Jesus seemed to make it clear that there was something demonic happening. I do not worry. I do not believe that a Christian can be possessed. I don't believe that. I do believe that there is spiritual warfare that happens, that there is spiritual attack that happens. Um, One of my really good friends pastors one of our churches in our denomination in another part of the state of Oregon, and recently went to a house where the family was feeling demonic activity, and there was some weird things going on, and um, he went to pray for them, and he texted me, said, "Hey, I'm on my way to do this thing. Can you pray with me for this?" And I said, "Absolutely." Um, my brother was present at an exorcism, and it was not anything like the movies. But my brother and I think it was 4 or 5 other guys were there, and they all testified to the same thing happening. Really out of nowhere kind of situation. Nothing like the movies. So I fully believe that those things exist, and that there are people who, um, even in the church, in the sense of like they're part of a church community, but they themselves are not a Christian, and they may have that sort of affliction, that kind of possession. When it comes to children, we know that kids can be afflicted by the sins of their family, the sins of their community. Um, if a kid grows up, I've known people that seemingly were predisposed to substance abuse issues because of things that happened while they were in the womb. I know a surprising amount of people who their first beer was when they were like 4 or 5 years old, and it was their dad or their grandpa or somebody. And if you're having your first beer, this isn't an anti-alcohol statement. This is a anti-substance abuse statement. If you're having your first beer with an adult at age 4 or 5, there's probably substance abuse issues happening in the home. I know a lot of guys who their first exposure to pornography was because of a father, an uncle, an adult family member in their life who exposed them to that, and that had ramifications. So is it very possible that there was pagan occultic practices happening in her family circle or in her community that opened her up to that sort of attack? It's very possible. I started the video by saying we have to think about what distracts from the mission that God has given us. If churches or Christians emphasize this one part of the Bible that is admittedly less clear than other parts of the Bible, then I think that would diminish our work on the mission that God has given us. If we understand that as Christians, our role is to bring healing and freedom to people who are in bondage, slaves to sin, slaves to cycles of substance abuse and poverty and broken homes and broken relationships and all of these things that go along with sin. So if we understand that our role is to bring freedom, then we would rightly understand that part of that freedom is a spiritual freedom. And it may be that you've had struggles dealing with somebody or a situation, and there could be a spiritual element to it. Lately, I've been praying, asking the Lord for clarity and discernment on the spiritual warfare happening. I see potential for division, even among Christians who love each other, because we would allow politics or philosophy to divide us over how to best reopen or how to best operate under the current situation. And there has to be a spiritual element to that. So in terms of can a child be possessed, I'm not worried about my kids, and I'm not worried about the kids of our church. I am worried about sin and how it affects kids all over our community. I'll tell you a story, and this is true. This happened a couple weeks ago, but I was laying in bed. I don't remember if I had fallen asleep or if I was still awake, but heard a lot of talking outside. And I looked out the window, and out on Hill Road, right in front of the church, there was a group of people who were obviously, if not homeless, then involved in we would call them tweakers, right? And there was a little kid with a backpack on, midnight, 1 a.m, whenever this was. And for a number of years, I worked graveyards. I was a grocery store manager, and I worked graveyards. And 3 a.m, somebody would come in with a little kid or a couple little kids, and you just heartbreak for them. And I've been praying for this little kid. Don't know if it was a boy or a girl. Been praying for them to be set free, to be delivered, to be spared. And so whether it's something spiritual or whether it's something substance abuse or whether it's something cultural, these sort of life-dominating sins, we have a message of hope and of victory and of freedom. So is the supernatural real? Yes. Just as God is at work, and he has all kinds of angels and creatures that we don't understand. You can read Isaiah chapter 6 of the book of Revelation, chapter 4 and 5. These creatures we don't understand. We also know that the devil is real and that he has followers. And there is spiritual warfare happening. So we pray, we trust. I don't fear. I don't focus on things that are not the main thing. But I recognize some realities that if I fall into sin, it doesn't just affect me, but it affects others. And it affects not just me or other adults, but it can affect kids. And so my kind of closing thought, my closing prayer is that on the positive side, how do we live in a way that is positive towards others and towards our kids, in a way that, generationally, this is kind of born to be true. There's something about 3 generations. I remember talking to a small business owner years ago, and he said, the kind of the general stereotype is that you have a founding generation of the business, and they start the business, and a second generation either takes it to the next level or they maintain it. And then small family businesses tend to flounder in the 3rd generation. And he said, I'm the 3rd generation owner, and I'm very worried about that. I have found that to be true in faith as well, that a previous generation has a radical conversion experience, and they fully give their lives to God. A second generation grows up in the church and has a sort of a passive casual faith, and then the 3rd generation, we lose them. And so I think there is something to that how I live can positively influence others, including the next generation, and how I live can negatively influence others. But when there are families and children and old and young who are in bondage, we bring a message of hope for freedom. So God bless you. We'll be online tomorrow night, 7 p.m. for our Zoom gathering. Love to have you there, be part of it. If you don't have the link, shoot me a Facebook message or adam@faithonhill.com. We'll get you the link. And then this Thursday, episode 3 of 20-Minute Bible Study will be released. So looking forward to that. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.